All right, so my paper was about special education, and I kind of just looked at the history behind it, everything that was associated with special education, how it kind of came forth and was implemented into schools. And what I found most interesting about my research is that the United States didn't actually implement special education programs officially until 1975, which kind of means that a lot of students were not receiving the help that they needed in order to be successful inside or outside of the classroom. And I also found like the United States isn't the only capitalistic type of country. There's also capitalist ideals in the UK, which is another place that I looked and found for my research. And they were kind of saying that the only reason why they implemented special education in the UK was to make sure that students were prepared to be in the workforce, which I thought was really interesting, instead of actually being genuinely concerned for their education and whether or not they are prepared and succeeding in the classroom. But they did kind of go back and reframe what they were saying that they did express a genuine concern for the children and had and a wish to do what was best for them and like take pride in their achievements, which was interesting to me, but it was also kind of felt like a second thought. Like, while we do want them to succeed, we want them more to be prepared to be in the workforce. So the United States, not the United States, the United Kingdom in 1913 had the act that formalized the process of basically testing for mental defect, and so that's kind of how they decided who needed to be placed into these special schools for special education. But they were saying that the spaces that they had were limited. They didn't really have effective teachers because they weren't experienced with how to kind of accommodate these students. They didn't know how to modify their work to help them actually understand what was supposed to be taught. And so they came up with a whole bunch of definitions and mandates and stuff like that to kind of progress special education forward and help these students. So Rethinking Schools kind of states that in the United States, special education is the most heavily regulated and underfunded of all federal education mandates. So this kind of means like even though special education is established now, it's not properly funded by the government to make sure that we are meeting the needs of students through teachers, equipment / material, and even curriculum, because there is no set curriculum for special education. They're still learning the same things, but it's just with modifications. So in 1975, the federal government promised to cover 40% of additional costs for special education and for students with disabilities, but only about 15% of that is being covered as promised. So that means that more than half of what was promised is not going towards special education. It's actually going towards something else. Don't know what that is. It's probably the military, but so going on from that, I just think that it's interesting that I found like even though that we've implemented things for special education, there's not enough teachers, there's not enough spaces to really help these students. They're like in classrooms with other children, which is good because they need to be able to interact with others, but they also aren't getting those one-on-one interactions that they really need with the teachers. And so schools have kind of come up with plans for IEPs. And so the definition for IEP is that it's a written document detailing a student's educational needs and the steps a school plans to take to meet those needs. And so a group of teachers and other faculty members, even parents of the students, are able to meet and kind of like make up a plan for how they're going to meet the needs of these students. However, as far as I know, most schools only have one special education teacher within the classroom, which was kind of hard to meet the standards of those students with different IEPs and different plans to help them stay on track. And I feel like that's a lot of pressure that they're putting on one teacher to kind of basically figure out how to accommodate over 10 students, maybe like 30 students that probably have IEPs in one classroom. And I just think that's interesting that they've made it that in order for a teacher to really understand special education, they need to be able to have individualized instruction for the students. They need to be able to modify for the students and monitor each student's progress. But how are we actually going to do that if we only have one teacher helping out? And yeah, so those are kind of some of the key points of my paper. I just thought it was very interesting, like, that we have established this program, but there's so much that we can do, so much more funding that can go into it to really help get it to where it needs to be and help these students, and not just have these low expectations for what they can do, because obviously if you're setting low expectations, of course they're only going to try to meet that expectation instead of trying to go above that. And I think that's something that we also need to teach, like, students is going to be above and beyond what is expected of you. And I think that's definitely possible, especially in a special education classroom, that they can do whatever they want to do, or like their heart is set out to do. And yeah, thanks for listening to my screencast about special education.